In today's video, we're going to go ahead and replace our Serpentine dry belt kit, including our tensioner, belt, and idler, located right down here on the front side of your motor. Using your plastic trim tool remover, go ahead and remove this button right here. Pop out the center, remove that clip. Remove these two screws, this one here. And this one here. Across the front, we're going to remove our 10mm screws. Good. Remove your shield, set that aside. Now with the splash shield removed, we're going to go ahead and access our drain plug right here on the lower part of our radiator. This little knob right here, you want to turn it counterclockwise. And as this comes out, we should start to get some coolant out of here. Let this drain into your catch can or your bucket. Now that our coolant is drained out, we can go ahead and tighten up the drain plug here. Once that bottoms out, just give it a little bit more, make sure that's snug. Using our 10mm wrench here, we're going to go ahead and loosen our ground terminal on our battery, pull it off and set it aside. On the front side of our engine here, we're going to use a 13mm socket. We're going to use our Serpentine belt idler tool. We're going to push this back and take the tension off of that pulley and remove our belt. You reach in there and just slide that belt off. I'm going to go ahead and work our belt off. Okay, good. Pull that belt out and set it aside. We're going to use our trim tool and pop the buttons on our radiator support cover here. Just pop that trim, remove these buttons, do this all the way across the front. Once these are all out, we'll go ahead and remove the cover and set that aside. Use our 10mm socket. We're going to remove these two bolts right here. Disconnect your vacuum ports here on the side of your intake. Go ahead and pull this up. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this connector right here. Push on the little tab. Wiggle that off. I'll go ahead and lift this up on the bottom side. I'm going to use our pliers and just pinch the little tabs here and push that little harness connector through. Do the same here. You can go ahead and set this aside. Move the lower portion of your air intake tube. Gently lift up on this, wiggle this. And what we're doing is we're disconnecting it from the bottom side of the air box. Go ahead and twist that up and out. So there's two portions. You're disconnecting this here as well as this here. Let's go ahead and disconnect our expansion tank here. It's two 10mm bolts. Move that one, and this one over here. Go ahead and disconnect the hose from our radiator here. Go ahead and lift this up and set it aside. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect our hood latch here that's bolted to our radiator support. There's two 10mm bolts on the top, one on the middle and the bottom. I'm just going to let that hang down for now, right there. And the bolts that I remove here on the top, I'm just going to thread those back into our support. I'm going to use a 12mm gear wrench and remove the bolts holding our horns here. And just lower our horn down. And I'm going to thread that bolt back in. Do the same on the other one. I'm going to get and unbolt our radiator support brace here. There's a series of 10mm bolts across this here. Let's go ahead and loosen and remove these. Go ahead and grab that brace and set that aside. I'm going to disconnect the connector to our hood latch here. Disconnect this here, bring this up and swing this over and set it aside. On the back side of our cooling fans here, I want to go ahead and disconnect our wiring harness. So we're just going to use our trim tool. I'm going to get behind the plastic clips here and pop these off. We have our connector right here to our cooling fan module. Just going to press in on this tab and wiggle this connector off. Going to tuck that harness aside here. We want to go ahead and remove our clamp here on our radiator. So pinch that, work this back. And give this hose a couple twists here and pop this off. And go ahead and slide this back and pop that in like that. To separate our cooling fan from our radiator, there's going to be these little tabs here. I want to pinch these and push our fan out. There's going to be the series of these here. There's 3 of them across the top. So I want to go ahead and pinch those and work this fan out. And we're going to go ahead and lift out our cooling fan assembly. Along the passenger side here, the radiator hose goes into a plastic clip shaped like a C and is holding that hose in place. So I'm going to reach down here and I'm going to grab that hose and just kind of push that back and out of that retainer clip. It is a tight fit. It's going to take a little bit of effort to do it. Now that we have the hose out, let's go ahead and grab our cooling fan assembly. And it's a little bit of a task to try and get this out around our sensors and stuff like that. and set that aside. Let's go ahead and grab our upper engine cover here. Gently tug that upward. Go ahead and remove that and set that aside. Next, we want to go ahead and separate our wire harness running across the top of the engine here down to our alternator. We're going to start up top here with a little pocket screwdriver. We're going to press up on that clip there and just wiggle this harness. Pull that up and off. We have our cam sensor here. We're going to pinch and pull on that sensor. Pull that off here. Under this cover right here, we're going to lift this up, and there's a 10mm bolt right here. Let's go ahead and loosen and remove that. I'm going to spin that there. I'm going to pull this off. I'm just going to thread this nut back on there for now. There's another 10mm right here for the harness. Let's remove that. We need to disconnect these sensors on our alternator as well as our AC compressor. So we're going to disconnect that. There's one down here. Using a pick to come around the bottom of this clip and our pry tool to separate this little retainer clip right here. We want to go ahead and separate that sensor connector right there. Right on the bottom here is another harness retainer. Go ahead and release this. Now on the front side of our alternator, we have a 14mm bolt located right here. We want to go ahead and loosen that there. We're going to use our deep socket and our ratchet. Let's get on in there and let's go ahead and loosen this. And we'll remove it. You should be able to get to a point where we can go ahead and loosen that bolt. Get to remove that. On the back side of our alternator, there's a bracket that is bolted to the engine block, and as well as it goes onto the back side of the alternator. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unbolt this right here, and when we pull the alternator out, there's going to be a wire harness, this harness here, that is attached to the bracket. So we're going to have to unbolt this, pull the alternator, disconnect this harness, and then unbolt the bracket from the alternator. Using a 12mm socket, we're going to go ahead and loosen and remove this. Good, remove that bolt. So we're going to remove our 14mm bolt from the top of our alternator. Let's go ahead and try and work our alternator loose here. Might be able to use a little pry bar here and just gently work that out like so. And go ahead and work this forward around our harness. And it looks like here our harness had popped off of our bracket on the back side. So we can go ahead and pull our alternator up and out. Now if your harness is still attached, here's the little tab right here it will be attached to, so you just pop the harness out of that. Go ahead and set your alternator aside. Now our tensioner is bolted to the side of the engine right here. And here's one of the bolts. Here's the tensioner itself, the bracket. Now there's a bolt down on the back side here that we have to get to. In order to get access to that, we need to unbolt our AC compressor. We're just going to unbolt it and swing it over so we can get access to those bolts. With these two top bolts, these are 12mm bolts on our AC compressor. Let's loosen and remove those. Now on the bottom of your air compressor, there's going to be two more bolts. They're pretty much directly down from where the upper ones are. So follow the upper bolt down, and it's right underneath this connector right here. That's also a 12mm. So you just kind of have to reach down there. I'm going to go ahead, loosen and remove that one. And then the fourth one is just to the left of it, right underneath the other corresponding bolt. Go ahead and work that bolt out. At this point here, we have that bolt pretty much loose. Spin out the last couple threads here, and we'll just take our compressor and we're going to pull that forward. Now on a tensioner bracket here, we have 5 bolts we need to loosen or remove. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's go ahead and get those out of our bracket. So as I remove these bolts here, I'm going to go ahead and bring them up, and I'm going to put them right in the place where they're supposed to go on our replacement unit. At this point here, our tensioner is pretty much falling out. Let's get this last bolt out. We'll go ahead and work our tensioner up and out. Using a 14mm socket, let's go ahead and loosen our 14mm bolt here, holding our idler. Install our shim on the back, bolt and washer on the front. Let's go ahead and get this lined up. Get that bolt started, and I like to thread it down as far as I can by hand. All right, let's go ahead and tighten it down, and we'll torque this bolt. I'm going to torque this bolt to 40 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and lower our tensioner down in a position. Let's go ahead and start installing the bolts. I'm going to go ahead and get all the bolts started by hand, and then we'll go back and tighten these down. Go ahead and torque down these 5 bolts to 32 foot-pounds. Go ahead and continue for the other 4. We want to go ahead and install our AC compressor here. What we're going to do first is we're going to lift this up, and we're going to install our 2 upper bolts, get those started by hand, and then the 2 lower bolts should line right up, and we'll get those started as well. I'll go ahead and start these by hand, make sure they go in straight. With the 2 upper bolts installed, you can go ahead and install your lower. Get those started. Get the other side threaded in, and then we'll tighten them down. Now that we have all the bolts in, just make sure that these are good and tight. There are no real specs for this here, so you just want to make sure that once those bolts are in there, that they're nice and snug. Do that for the bottom as well. Okay, let's go ahead and move the harness out of the way. Let's lower our alternator down in position. You want to be careful lowering this down. You don't want to damage your radiator at all. Go ahead and work that pulley in past the hose. Now we have our bracket in the back. As we feed this in, we need to go ahead and get that harness popped into that. So as we feed this in, we're going to use a pair of pliers to go ahead and get that harness installed. I'm just going to use our pliers here and swing our alternator around. Get that little harness popped into place. And there we go. Let's go ahead and work our alternator into place. Let's go ahead and get our top bolt started. I'm just going to get this bolt started a few threads. Let's go ahead and get our front lower bolt installed. Have to go ahead and get that bolt started in, thread it in as far as you can. I'm going to go ahead and get the bracket bolt started here. I'm going to thread that in several threads here, but we're not going to tighten that down yet. We're going to go ahead and we're going to tighten down our forward mounted bolts here on the front of the alternator. We're tightening up the bottom one now. Once this is good and snug, we're going to go ahead and tighten down the upper one just above it. Once that bolt bottoms out, I'm going to give it a few more turns here. Just going to go to the upper bolt here. Once that bottoms out, make sure it's good and tight. It's good and tighten down our last bolt on that bracket here. Once that bottoms out, give it a little bit more. Install your harness and connectors. Before we tighten these down here, let's go ahead and press our harness onto our brackets here. Install your cam sensor harness here, and then our bracket on the top. Let's grab our 10mm socket and tighten down that bolt and nut. Go ahead and just bottom out that bolt and just give it a little extra. And our nut here, I want to go ahead and tighten that down. Slide that boot back over. Now before installing our cooling fan here, we're going to go ahead and use our 12mm socket. We're going to loosen and remove the bolt holding our oil dipstick. This is going to allow us to go ahead and move this dipstick over a little bit. This is going to allow for our radiator cooling fan motor to drop down between our heat shield here and drop down into place. When installing our cooling fans here, I want to go ahead and drop this down, this little bracket right here. There's two of them. You're going to drop it down into these here. You're going to drop it onto these little T's. There's one there and one on the passenger side here. That way it locks into place. When we drop this down into place, right here is where your radiator hose is going to go. So as we drop it in, we're going to have to manipulate that hose into position and into this clip. Just watch for your vacuum hoses and cables as you lower this down into place. In order for our cooling fans to drop down, we have to go ahead and position our radiator hose into that little bracket on the side here. So we have to reach down and move that hose. Push the fans down into place. We'll get our hose in place there. I want to make sure that our cooling fans are in those brackets down below. Now they're lined up on the bottom, go ahead and snap our cooling fan onto our radiator. Install and tighten the dipstick tube bracket bolt. Once that bolt bottoms out, give it a little bit more. I'm gonna go ahead and swing our latch over. So go ahead and bring our radiator support into place here. Once we have our bracket in place here, let's go ahead and install our bolts. Go ahead and just get our bolts all started by hand. Once we get all these in, we'll go ahead and tighten them down. Install that last bolt here. I want to make sure that your bracket is on the outside of our radiator support here. And we'll tighten this down. When installing your latch, you want to make sure that your latch goes behind the center brace here. Line that up, get your bolts started up top. Once those are in, we're going to install our lower bolt. And I want to go ahead and tighten down our bolts for our latch. Once that bolt bottoms out, just give it a little bit more, make sure it's nice and tight, and then we'll get our last bolt on the bottom here and do the same with this one. Go ahead and install your horns and then tighten that down pretty good. Go ahead and repeat for the other side. Let's go ahead and connect our connectors here. Pop our harness into our fan assembly, connect our fan module connector here. I'm going to swing our radiator hose over, get that lined up. Just going to pop that on. Let's go ahead and get your hose installed here. I'm going to disconnect our battery completely. And go ahead and remove our battery from the battery tray and set that aside. With our battery removed, we can go ahead and grab our tray. We're going to pull that up and set it aside. Now we can go ahead and install our lower air intake tube. This is going to snake up underneath. When I reach around the back side of the air box, get this to fit in. It'll pop into place. Then we'll go ahead and install the lower portion of this tube onto our reservoir right here. I'll go ahead and pop this into place. It's going to install your battery tray here. Let's go ahead and lower our air intake tube in. Fit that into place. It's going to install our bolts here. Let's go ahead and tighten those down. Again, put our expansion tank down here. And get our bolts started, and we'll go ahead and tighten these down. I just want to lightly snug these down here. Install the hose on the expansion tank to the radiator. I'm going to go ahead and install our harness right here, and then install our connector. Here, and feel that snap into place. Go ahead and install your vacuum tubes right here. Let's go ahead and install our radiator cover here. Go ahead and install your plastic locking pins here. I'm just going to continue this right across the whole front. Let's go ahead and lower our battery down into place. Put our J-hook down, get that set up. Let's get our bolt installed here. Install our bolt. I'm going to snug that down. And we'll tighten down our J clamp. Just want to make sure that is snug. You don't want to over tighten that on the battery. And go ahead and install our terminals here. I'm going to snug down our terminals. Go ahead and install your cover if you have that there. Prior to removing our belt, I went and I drew a diagram of where our belt is to be routed and identified what pulley does what. I'm going to go ahead and install our belt, make sure that it is fully on all of our ribs on our pulleys, and then we'll go ahead and release that tensioner and tighten up that belt. Let's go ahead and bring our tensioner up and over. Bring our belt up and get that installed. With our tensioner pushed back, we're going to try and get our belt on our pulleys here. And it can be a little bit of a chore to get this on, but you want to make sure that that belt is on the ribs of all of our pulleys. As you can see, our belt is on all of our pulleys here. We can go ahead and slowly release the tension on our tensioner. Let's bring that back. Remove our tensioner tool. And we're just going to do a visual inspection as well as feel the pulleys, make sure that our belt is on all of these here properly and not off a tooth. Once we have that confirmed, we're all set with our belt. Go ahead and install your engine cover. You're good to go. Let's go ahead and install our splash guard here. Now these here you just want to snug down. They're literally just holding pieces of plastic together. Once you have all those secure, you're all set. Go ahead, open up our radiator cap. Remove that. We're going to set this up. Once we have that on, we're going to go ahead and get our funnel ready. And we're also going to open up our expansion tank. Pull that hose out. Let's go ahead and start to fill our cooling system. So you want to go ahead and use the recommended coolant for the vehicle application. We're going to continue to do this here until the radiator is full. So at this point here, we're going to go ahead and put our plug in here. Going to remove our funnel. I'm going to go ahead and remove our cap and funnel kit here. Install our radiator cap. Next, we want to go ahead and fill our expansion tank. We're going to fill it to the full line. Once this is done, we're going to go ahead and start the vehicle. We're going to let the vehicle run for about 20 to 30 minutes. Let the engine warm up and the thermostat open. As the engine warms up and that thermostat opens, it's going to pull the coolant from our expansion tank. At that point there, we can go ahead and open up the expansion tank cap and add coolant as necessary. We will never open up our radiator cap after the engine has been running and hot. Once we have a cap on, let's go ahead and start the vehicle and get it warmed up. After you've had the vehicle running for a little while, I want to go ahead and inspect for any leaks. If everything is okay, you can go ahead, top this off as necessary. If you're good, you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.